first of all, thank you, Jonathan, for joining us and taking the time to speak with Platform. I want to start with, your life before the arrest. You mentioned in another interview that visiting Auschwitz and seeing a dead body for the first time in Prague was a formative experience that taught you that if you're weak, you die. And you walked out of it with a chip on your shoulder towards non-Jews and our own Jewish leadership for allowing the Holocaust to happen.
Correct.
Do you feel that these two experiences influenced your decision to spy for Israel?
I think they were formative as far as my commitment to securing Israel's survival. What form that took was something that developed over time. I obviously didn't walk out of Auschwitz, actually it was Bergen-Belsen or Prague, ready to be an agent for Israel. There was always a problem in my life between my need and desire to make Aliyah and my obligation to be a good son. And my parents were of the belief that they wouldn't mind me going on Aliyah, assuming that I fulfilled my military obligation to the United States, and this was Vietnam, and that I was prepared with a vocation to be a productive member of society here. Unfortunately, life throws you curveballs sometimes, and I stayed too long in the United States. If I had gone to Israel, if I'd made Aliyah when I should have, well, it's possible I could have died in '73 because I wanted to go into the Armored Corps at that time. But on the other hand, I would have been spared whatever happened to me subsequently. But we don't believe in coincidence. As Jews, we don't believe in coincidence. So whatever happened to me for a reason. And when I first went into solitary, it was the first opportunity I had to really reassess what happened to me and why possibly it did. So it took me a long time to realize why I'd gotten myself into this mess at the time, and then come to terms with it. I didn't come to peace with it, but I came to terms with it. I'm still kind of assessing the whole process right now of how it happened. My father had warned me about not going into intelligence. He said, just go. If you're going to go to Israel. But this was something that it was kind of a confluence of events up in Boston or Cambridge that happened, and the offer was made, and I had just fallen out of an engagement, and I had seen her walking across Harvard Square with somebody else, and I just said, I can't live in the same city and watch this. So I took a leave of absence from a PhD program and joined Naval Intelligence. Was it a mistake? No, I don't think so. I walked down a path that I had selected. Shem gives you multiple paths, and I selected one. And in retrospect, I'm thankful I did. Despite all of the pain and suffering and hardship, I still think that there was a benefit. The problem was I seemed to be the only one that benefited from it, the experience. A lot of people are still sleepwalking through the consequences of my case, which dealt with the true relationship between the United States and Israel, and the Israeli government writ large as well. So there are many lessons to be learned from this case, from the path I took. It had nothing to do with me. I turned a light on, and you can blame the person who did that, but also look at what he revealed. Look at what was revealed by his actions. Spend some time thinking about that. And a lot of people in responsible positions in the American Jewish community, in New York in particular, just won't do that at all. that I consider a tragedy.
Along those lines, I was actually going to save this question for a little bit after, a later point in the interview, but I think it's a very interesting thing that you're saying, the impact, the consequences of your case on U.S.-Israel relations. How do you see your overall impact on U.S.-Israel relations and the legacy that it left?
To the extent that well, let me answer that in two ways. To the extent that what I did conformed to a preconceived agenda on the part of the American security and intelligence establishment, I kept telling people, don't look at dual loyalty, look at dual standards of justice. I mean, we don't believe in collective punishment in the United States, except in my case. No other ethnic spy, hyphenated spy, so to speak, community suffered the same way mine did. Ours did. In fact, at the time, the then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff answered a question concerning why I was punished so severely, and he said it was a warning to the Jewish community. Wow, I mean, wake up, wake up. Well, nobody did. The list of Jewish leaders that I was presented with to basically condemn as being party to Israeli intelligence were drawn up. That list was drawn up long before I was caught. So let's be real about this. So I tried to tell people at the time, if you want to know what I did, look at my indictment. And the indictment says quite clearly that I spied without intent to harm the United States. That should have really shaken a lot of people into rethinking what happened to me. The other thing is, with that statement by the government or admission by the government, we have to step back a minute and realize that there's some information which is so sensitive that if it's compromised to anyone, even the closest of allies, could do irreparable damage to the national security. And in that case, the defendant should have understood the potential consequences of what he was doing, and he should also have been indicted for intending to harm the United States. Well, you don't have to know exactly what was involved in the case to understand it didn't rise to that level, because I would have been indicted accordingly, and I wasn't. And when the real damage assessment came out 20 years later, I understood why they suppressed it for 20 years. There were really only two things mentioned in there. One was that I had given Israel information that should have been used for a quid pro quo in the course of the US-Israel Intelligence Exchange Agreement, but that was a joke because it had been violated by the US first. There was an undeclared intelligence embargo, which I'll get to in just a second, which led to my operation. And second of all, that certain Arab allies of the United States, one in particular that provided most of the oil to the United States and the international community, felt that I had made Israel too strong, by what I'd done. That was it. And when this information came out, nobody in the Jewish community said anything. And then to kind of cap everything else off, Weinberger, who was my nemesis, Caspar Weinberger, in an interview with Edward Black, the noted Jewish historian, he was asked by Edward, why wasn't Jonathan in your memoirs? And he said, because the Pollard case was a relatively minor matter, made more important than it was. Well, Ed jumped on that and said, well, wait a second, you gave a sworn deposition to the court saying he was a traitor, he was the worst person imaginable, whatever. And he kept saying, no, it was just made more important than it was. And when we took this information to the Justice Department of Ethics, or the Bureau of Ethics, and asked them, you want to reopen this thing now? And they said it's water under the bridge. And again, it was, what did we hear in the Jewish community establishment? Crickets. The other lesson in my case was what I call the Rosenberg lesson. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Why? Because within about 10 years of my incarceration, the U.S. understood that Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen were the ones responsible for the decimation of the CIA covert collection operation in the Soviet Union. Both of these guys blamed me for it, set me up for it. So when this became public, again, crickets. Nobody said anything. Senator Dennis DeConcini, the then chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, wrote a bipartisan letter to Clinton saying, "You got the wrong guy, let him go." And Clinton's response at the time was to the effect of, well, he's an important bargaining tool now in our negotiations with the Israelis over territorial swaps and land for peace and everything else. Interesting statement. One of the prosecutors came to see me many, many years later after he retired, and he asked me the following question. Do you remember, he said, when the judge asked you if you had any regret for all the people you'd killed? And I said, yes, I remember. He said, what did you say? I said, yes, I have regret that there wasn't one more. He said, where was your head when you said that? I said, Tunis. I was the guy that put the raid in October '85 together to avenge the death of 3 Israeli civilians in Larnaca, Cyprus. They were butchered by Arafat's security group, 417. And the objective of the strike was to kill Arafat. We had it done. And so we missed him. He deviated from his normal routine, and we missed him. He said, well, let me tell you where the judge's mind was. Aldrich Ames had just given him a briefing or a description of how General Igor Tretyakov, aka Tricycle code name, had been fed feet first into the furnace in the basement of the Lubyanka prison in front of his family. And I said to him, what has that got to do with me? He said, oh, I'll tell you. You were blamed for that. And now you're telling the judge you're sorry you didn't kill one more agent. So he said, when you looked around the court, if you looked around the courtroom, did you see an overabundance of armed guards? I said, it looked a little heavy. He said, a lot of the operations directorate people had volunteered to come in and cap you in the courtroom. That's how bad it was. So I got a sentence that was appropriate for a traitor, not for what I'd done. That's why I never asked for a pardon. I asked for commutation. I knew what I'd done. I didn't know what they thought until many, many years later. So the other problem for me, which again became known to the Jewish community later, was the fact that I played a role in Iran-Contra. And it's a role that I've never explained, and I've never cooperated with the government in pursuing. I've kept my mouth shut the whole time. And I will continue to do that. What I can say is I opened up the bank accounts in Switzerland. And when I refused to give the names of the people that I opened it up to, both Israelis and American, the tax court was kind enough to give me possession of the account. So I found myself very rich for about 10 seconds before, and this was noted by the judges, until everything came crashing down. And they went out with this statement that I had a secret Swiss bank account. Again, it was totally wrong. But look, I've always said that the most dangerous person in the world is a liar with an ounce of truth. But they were true. I had a bank account that they gave me, that they gave me, but that wasn't mine actually. So the Jewish community knew all of this, and they also knew why my operation was put into action. Now, we'll deal with the lessons from Israel. They understood that there was an undeclared intelligence embargo after the airstrike on the Iraqi nuclear reactor. But for understandable reasons, they were very reluctant, loath would be a better word to use, to publicize this fact. Because, look, we all know that more conflicts in the Middle East have been caused by miscalculation or misperception than by calculation. So nobody really wanted, from my side, from the Israeli side, wanted to alert our enemies to the fact that we might be blindsided and not fully aware of what they were doing. And they might be, we knew the Syrians had a standing start war plan for the Golan. Kind of like a redux of 73, possible redux of 73. We didn't want that, so we had to keep everything quiet. That's why when I was caught, naively, I expected them to explain what the basis of the operation was. The cabinet was composed of very smart people at the time. Ruthless, but very smart. You have to ask yourself, with such people, why would they run the risk? What was the cost benefit in their mind of running an agent like me if I were caught? And they ran the cost benefit analysis, and it said that it was important to run the operation even if I had been caught. Their mistake, and people here now more or less understand what I'm going to tell you right now, is that they should have been very candid about why the operation was needed. And most of all, they should have been candid about how I was caught. There was a CIA spy in the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee with very high-level clearances. How did I find out about this? Well, he brought a case when he retired. He was Russian, Soviet. Brought a case against the CIA for inadequate retirement. And he brought it in federal court in New York. And one of the things that he allegedly did that justified a better retirement was me, that he implicated me. What he did was he implicated, or he found out that there was a spy in an Israeli spy in naval intelligence. And the walls just closed in on me eventually. So the judge said, I can't argue with the credibility of what you're saying. I've checked it out, you're right, but I think this case should be done in camera. Well, he didn't like the end of it, so he came here to Israel and went on radio and bragged about what he'd done to me. So Esther Alei Shalom went to the head of the Shabak at the time and said, arrest him. Maybe you can trade him for my husband. And the answer was, we don't do that with the Americans. We don't do that. So, and this was known here. It still is known here about what happened. The problem with all of this, both in the United States with the American Jewish community and here with the government of Israel, is that they were unwilling to stand up for their rights. In the United States, they didn't have to like me or endorse what I did to support my call for a proportionate sentence or equal justice. On the other hand, the Israeli government should have been more candid in explaining why they authorized the operation instead of enraging both the American Jewish establishment and the governments, plural, of the United States by hiding behind an implausible deniability argument. We didn't know. It was a renegade operation. By the way, my first plea agreement identified me as an agent, bona fide agent, working on an approved operation without intent to harm the United States. When I went to take my plea, the plea agreement had been edited, blue and red ink. The blue is always American, the red is the foreign power, whatever it is. The blue ink had an initial next to it, AS, Avram Sofer, the legal counsel, State Department. I couldn't make out the initials on the Israeli side who did this, but what happened was I was no longer a bona fide agent. I was a renegade, mercenary. And it was no longer an approved operation, but an off-the-books. I'm trying to remember the exact word, unauthorized operation. And I looked at my lawyer, and I just said, I'm an orphan. I have no defense. And he said, well, look at your wife, my then wife. He said, she's not going to make it physically. So you want to be responsible for killing her? So I got up in front of the judge and he asked me, are you taking this of your free will? And I said, no. And I explained why. And I said, the document that you have now in front of you is perjury. It's a lie. I said, you can see the original and now this. You know what happened. He said, well, you have a very difficult decision to make. I said, they're threatening to kill my wife. This is an open court. He said, as I said, you have a difficult question. Well, this was known also to the Jewish establishment. Now, if I'd been, let's be honest with you, if I'd been an African American faced with that kind of situation, they would have been screaming and yelling and protesting and marching and I don't know what else. But with me, it was just, let's get them out of our face. Let's bury them. And bury them they did. Bury me they did. 150 meters underground. That house was nothing more than an elevator shaft. And when I got down to the bottom, there were 31 other cells of men who weren't talking for various reasons. So I was told by the warden of this very small facility, you know, as I've said before, look at the sky, look at the sun, look at the grass, breathe the air. You know, the next time you see this, you'll be a dead man. We'll see. God runs the world. So he said, we'll see. So for 7 years I was down there. You know, it was about 3 meters by 3 meters by 3 meters. It's very small. Never came out. Nothing to read, nothing to write, no phone calls, no visits, nothing. And I was told there are 2 ways of coming out. You can talk, or you can use the bar over your door. I knew what that was. So, you know, that's when I made the reacquaintance of God, because I realized, you know, I wasn't going to make this on my own. I wasn't going to kill myself. But the thought, the prospect of living in this environment, this shoebox, for the rest of my life just really, well, it didn't appeal to me very much. So he saved me. So when I came back up into the light, I found out that everybody else had committed suicide, the other 31 men. And when I saw the warden, you know, as I've told people, sometimes I have a problem watching my mouth. And I said, you see, I told you God runs the world. And he knocked me out. I have a tooth missing, which I won't fill, because it's zachor, it's a remembrance. It was the sweetest pain I ever had. You know, I got this guy really mad. He knocked me out. I have a weird sense of humor. So the Israelis didn't stop. They sent somebody I knew to tell me basically to kill myself. And there was a monitor from the National Security Agency there, a lieutenant colonel, highly decorated. And I didn't understand what the guy was telling me. You know, do you consider yourself a patriot? Do you love the country? Do you love your people? You know, why are you putting us all through this torment right now? Why don't you do the right thing? And we'll bring you home then. It was so alien to me. I didn't understand what he was saying. So the lieutenant colonel explained it to me. He said, Jonathan, they're telling you to kill yourself. And I looked at the guy, I said, is that what you're saying? And he said, yeah. So the US monitor grabbed him and escorted him out and came back and said, you know how politicians work. They use us, people like us. And so he said, just assure me that you're not going to do anything stupid like this. And I said, you know, Jews don't commit suicide. We buy retail. And he missed the joke. It was kind of wasted. I thought it was pretty good, you know, off the cuff. But the lessons were not learned on the American side in the Jewish community, and the lessons were not learned on the Israeli side either, at all. Quite the opposite. So, did I learn any lessons from that? Yeah, I learned a lot of lessons. You always have a get out of jail card, which I thought I had, but I didn't. If somebody tells you to jump off a cliff, you invite them to jump first. These are the kinds of practical lessons I learned from that. But whether I feel now that I did anything wrong, no, I don't. At all. And so the question has always been asked me, if you had to do it over again, would you? Knowing then what you know now. And the answer is no, I wouldn't reconsider. I would do it again. Probably better the next time. But no. Every country has the right to self-defense, including Israel. And that's something that the American Jewish community just doesn't get, even to the present day. The United States is no angel, far from it. Look, in my case, they had a spy right in the legislature. Has anybody said anything about that since then? I haven't heard anything. Nothing. It's a fact. It can be researched. Nothing. So when there is a community, such American Jewish community, that is so scared that it doesn't understand its need to defend its right to equal justice. I mean, so much for Washington's guarantee at the Touro Synagogue that we would be treated as equals in the country. But these people just don't get it. One of the Jewish leaders that finally came to see me gave me an interesting answer to a question. I asked him what would happen if I came in and talked to you about what was happening. We needed to do something about this. He said, I would have listened to you, and then I would have offered you a cup of coffee and then called the FBI to have you arrested. I said, really? He said, yeah, we don't need people like you running around. I said, warning you about what I knew? He said, I don't want to know what you knew. I just wanted to shut you up because you're compromising our position. I said, what about the lives of millions of Jews in Israel? He said, that's their responsibility. Whoa. I looked at him and I said, you haven't learned the lessons of the Churban, have you? And I guess you were missing from Cheder that day when we talked about Kol Aravim Zeh Lezeh and all that good stuff. He said, no, that's for Cheder. So I got a lesson in reality. And it just basically reinforced the rather low opinion of what I thought of the American Jewish leadership after I left Bergen-Belsen. Sorry, Dachau. We went to so many concentration camps because we didn't know which one our family had been murdered in. So they all kind of blend after a while, whether it's Auschwitz, Sobibor, Theresienstadt, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen. It's all one big blur for me. But that one was Dachau that I walked out, and that was the end of childhood.
I've been myself. It's definitely an extremely intense experience, to be sure. So going.
Yo, hold on.